Hello and welcome to the Business Agility Live conversation. Today we're here with Phil Abernathy. We're going to have a conversation, myself, Mick Lavin and Manoy Khanna. Phil with us is a global expert in business agility with over 13 years of hands-on experience in the field, crafting and leading large-scale agile transformations at companies such as Suncor, IBM, Honeywell Aerospace and WFS. He's an aspiring agile leadership speaker, trainer, coach, and consultant with a mission to make every workplace a happy and productive workplace. We've known Phil for some time and are happy for him to have him with us here today to present. He was at our conference last year in Vienna, the Business Agility Live conference. Phil's passion is making a material difference to the top and bottom line of companies by substantially lifting the capability of their leaders. This may be an especially useful talent as we move out of the shadow of COVID-19. Phil has 35 years of experience with blue chip companies. He's the founder of Purple Candor, an international company focused on enabling leadership excellence and business agility. And he's also a founder of Skill the Gap, a not-for-profit organization focused on helping upskill students and first-time job seekers for the market out there. Phil, welcome to the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mick. Thank you very much. Thank you, Manoj.
Welcome. So let me just start with a with a question, actually. So we want to keep this very interactive, and we want to make sure that it's a sort of a discussion which we are having amongst ourselves, and there are no bad questions or bad ideas, right? I mean, we're just exploring the realm of business agility and agility in general, specifically related to the business. So as you do a lot of coaching with the C-suite, and you mentioned some time ago also in our conversation before, that time is soon drawing near for companies to start implementing digital transformation in the context of org changes. And you also talk about somewhat of a burning platform that is required for this change to happen. right? Maybe you can talk us through the context behind this, and also about the burning platform that you mentioned.
Well, in most of the transformations that I've worked on in the last 10 years at least, the need for change, the absolute need for change, was not 100% there with many companies. Yes, they felt they had to change, and people were open to change. They saw the need to go completely digital, but there was no burning platform. I mean, banks, financial industry, for example, in the last 10 years, they've made more money than they've ever made, hand over fist. And with that sort of environment, there was no imperative, no burning platform to change. What's happened with COVID, however, is that it's put this huge pressure on the bottom line. Top line is also going to suffer. And now companies have that learning platform, and it's almost a survival platform. You either change, adapt, and survive. And on the other hand, companies have seen that the ones that have not been able to go remote, to use the digital infrastructure, to have all their processes digitized so people can work from home, have lost. I know one major blue chip client who has gained almost 30%, 30% in growth, because their competitors could not take orders online, because their competitors could not process and deliver stuff while working from home for the first 3 weeks, and it knocked them out. So that's what I mean by the digital imperative, that companies are now realizing that this can happen again and again. And even if it doesn't happen, the customer, the consumers themselves are now so savvy, they don't want to do business any other way after this experience. They're going to pick the customers and the suppliers that they work with because they can be digital.
Phil, do you think that a lot of companies they were able to actually go digital as such? They were able to communicate and work digitally. But do you think there's also a shift in how they do business? I mean, one thing is to be able to facilitate your people working from home, but you have to change the way you do business as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, just working from home and pushing paper is not going to work. So the minute you digitize your processes, forget about automating them. Automation is another word altogether. Just digitize your business processes, whether it's receiving an order, fulfilling an order, collecting payment, following up on payment, issuing documents, getting signatures. If you can digitize that, the interface and the customer experience, the user experience, starts becoming more transparent and better. So you get a better and a different user experience. And that's where companies have to focus on. It's not just about, oh yeah, I've got a Wi-Fi connection to all my employees and now they can sit at home and stamp paper. That won't work.
So the organizations should think about cutting back and reorganizing?
Well, that's not linked. I mean, you don't have to cut back to do a digital transformation. That's no way directly linked. However, there is an indirect link. If you look at taking your processes digital, for many companies that I work with, if you digitize that process, you may need less number of people to do it. Now, that doesn't mean automate it. That doesn't mean get rid of people by just putting in robots or robotic process automation, RPA. I'm actually talking about streamlining the process. Now, once that happens, you may need less people. But more than anything, a digital transformation involves not just the infrastructure alone. It also involves the culture. It involves the leadership. It involves the focus on the customer and the way you interact with the customer, the whole user experience or customer experience, as we call it. So digital transformation is quite a broad word that is used very fluidly. Some people mean infrastructure changes, or we're moving everything to the cloud. That's their digital transformation. And they don't change the culture. They don't change the bureaucracy. They don't change the complex org structures, and they don't really benefit from it. So it is a holistic, it's got a holistic aspect to it in order to gain the full benefits.
So how do...
Sorry, go ahead, Manoj.
I was going to ask, related to this was, how do people actually prepare for such a change?
So I think in terms of the journey itself, the first step of any such journey is the why. Do you really need to change? Because these changes are painful, they are difficult. No change is easy. So you have to, in some way, have a real burning platform, a need. And in the last 5 to 6 years, I've seen that the CEO, he or she, believes and knows together with the board that this has to be done. But then the executive leadership and definitely the level down don't see that need. They don't see the why. So the first step on this journey is getting everybody bought into the why. This has to be done. The next step, of course, is the what. What do you need to change? So there's all the aspects I mentioned earlier. Is it the infrastructure? Is it the applications? Is it the user experience? Is it the digitization of your business processes? Is it your working culture? Is it your org structure? Is it your operating model? Is it the way you do budgeting and funding of your work? And those are the what aspects. And the final piece of the puzzle on this transformation journey is the how. So how are we going to do it? Is this a program of change? Or like in many of the big banks I've worked with, it's sometimes almost unbelievable. They hire one person who is a transformation manager. The person has never worked Agile, most probably. They are a change manager. They've done some change, but availability is not a skill. And they are immediately appointed as the transformation manager, and we're on a transformation journey. That's definitely not the way to organize a major change like this. So it's important that they look at the how.
So, Phil, you've talked about kind of the leadership have known for a few years they need to change. I work on the ground level, and I see a lot of people at the ground level that say they want to change, they see a need for change. But you talk about then the level in between, that kind of senior and middle management layer. That's a cultural change, though, isn't it? More so than anything else.
It absolutely is. And, people are smart. It is a threat to the middle layer. It is a threat to senior executive layers as well. Because if you do an org structure design to meet the principles of agility, so small cross-functional teams, processing single funnels of work, prioritizing it and flowing it down to the teams, you don't need that much managers. You don't need that many. So people know this instinctively, and hence the resistance, because it is a threat to their positions, to their jobs. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the threat of the unknown is always very disconcerting for everybody. So the best way to do it is, like many companies have done, is to take them on the journey. Explain the why to them, explain the what to them, have them be involved in developing the what while maintaining the principles. I've worked with one company where they had the people who were, let's say, at risk of losing their jobs, and you call it middle management and senior management. They were involved in the transformation process, actively coming up with ideas, all the time knowing that they themselves individually could be the person that when the music stops, they don't have a chair.
So how do you support those people? Because there's an element of fear there, that I might lose my job if this change happens, if it's successful. I might lose my job if we bring in new technology that can automate me, or the process changes and my function is no longer required. How do we deal with the fear in the organization to enable us to continue with a transformation like that?
Well, the first step for me always is honest transparency, to be authentic. If you're not, and a lot of leaders who start these transformations, and I've been told, because I do not mention the word cost cuts, because it's not you're going to have cost cuts. You know that. Otherwise, you can't streamline a fat and bureaucratic organization because your org is too big. No, but we can't talk about that. So they lie. think that people don't know that they're lying. Of course they know they're lying. And that causes more fear. So the first step to managing fear is to be transparent, is to be authentic, and to take them on the journey. The next one, I'll give you a real life example. So here was this bank, and I'll name you the bank because it was a fantastic experience working with them. It was called Bendigo Bank in Australia, in Victoria. And they started their journey. They're not a very big bank. They're around, let's say, a medium-sized bank in Australia. And they are a community bank. So they're based in rural areas as well. And they had one stake. They said, we will not fire anyone on this transformation journey. We will make changes to your role. People may have to leave for other reasons, but we will not fire anybody. You will not lose your job. So this created safety. And now people started working together. They reduced their headcount by 30%. And they did this through early retirement, through just normal attrition and not refilling it, and to getting rid of the contractors. Just these three actions enabled them to reduce 30% of their staff. They didn't have to let go of a single person. They repurposed some of the managers. So a lot of the managers had achieved management position, but they were actually experts in their field, in their craft. They were super good business analysts. So they were fantastic tech leads who were suddenly made a manager. And actually, they were not happy. So they offered, at the same salary, they came down into different positions all around, and they repurposed themselves. So with these techniques, you can easily restructure an organization without firing people. But there is going to be significant change. Be honest about it.
So, Phil, at this point, we're 3 months. The crisis is kind of starting to level out in some parts of the world, but organizations have had to either invest in people or take government bailouts or extend credit. They're suddenly at a point where they need to make these decisions quickly. How are they going to have that open, honest, transparent, and authentic conversation with their people?
Well, I think now is a good time to have that conversation because, as I said, the burning platform is there. You have to go digital. You have to cut costs. You have to slim down. You have to, let's say, get rid of unnecessary real estate and save cost wherever you can. You have to reduce travel costs. So wherever there is a possibility, you have to reduce costs. And companies are going to be honest and authentic about it now. And that's why I feel this is a great time. People will start true transformations. As I've said in my article recently, there's enough of material out there. The Business Agility Institute has done a tremendous amount of benefit for the entire community by gathering all these, let's say, artifacts and experiences and case studies and great coaches and great trainers all over. So there's no dearth of people to help them on this journey. What they do have to do, and this is what they need, is the will to change. The how to change will come after that. Manoj, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I'm just gonna take a step back and go into the leadership capabilities, right? In the past, you actually have mentioned about 3 different capabilities for agile leaders, right? And the difference between good companies and great companies. So would you like to guide us through some of your thought process within this realm?
Well, for me, those 3, let's say the 3 main capabilities are, number 1, the ability to create clarity of purpose. Number 2, the ability to have control without controlling. And the third one, to design your organization for flow. Now, there are 2 pieces that sit on top and under these 3. The bottom one is what I call living agile. You got to live the human values of servant leadership and be, let's say, a leader that believes in those values and principles. At the top of it, you've got to hire great talent. There's no point in having clarity of purpose and controlling without control, etc., without having great talent. So 3 main pieces, once again, that clarity of purpose even so, because of times of COVID, when people are going to be working at home, large number of people are going to be remote in the coming year, at least, in one form or the other. And if you don't have clarity of purpose, they would be so disengaged from the rest that it will affect productivity, it will affect morale, it will affect even turnover and attrition rates will be very high. So it is an imperative now to have that skill. The second one is when people are distributed like this in a remote environment, how do you control them? How do you, let's say, maintain control of your organization without controlling them and micromanaging them? So you have to maintain control. And this is where I find a lot of the Agile, let's say, information, a lot of the Agile material out there tends to stay away from this word control. They see it as a bad word. It isn't a bad word. And this is why a lot of leaders shy away from Agile, because they think, what are these people talking about? No control, just empower the people and let them do what they want. Of course, that's not it. You have to have control, but you can't micromanage, and you can't be controlling to the point where you do not empower people and let them feel safe to ask questions, to challenge decisions, to talk openly, to give you honest feedback if something is not working. So creating that safety environment of what they call psychological safety, and then being able to have control through metrics and measures is the key to the second skill. The third skill, of course, is designing for flow. This is how do you design an org structure that is able to work extremely agile. That means deliver business value better, faster, cheaper. That's what it means, nothing else. And resulting in happier employees, happier customers, and happier shareholders. And that skill involves two parts. The first part is the org structure, and the second part is the operating model. You've got to change both in order to get optimum flow through. Hope that answers, Manoj. Yeah.
Yep.
Within that context, that trust is still the kind of underlying factor. The people in your organization, if they don't trust in the organization that it's doing the right thing, even while controlling them, then surely they'll cheat the system.
Yeah, people will always cheat the system. I think there's no way around it. I mean, whether you look at the Googles or the Facebooks or whatever, you get not so good people. Let's put it that way. In every place, every color, every religion, every creed, everything. Thank gosh, those numbers are extremely small, and we should not put everybody in jail just because of a very, very small minority.
So I'm not really looking at the individual as such, but the management structures we put in place in an environment that lacks trust, where KPIs drive the productivity or the utilization. In those places, we find that management structures cheat on the KPIs.
Well, I don't think KPIs are bad. I don't think KPIs are the cause of that. I think my feeling is that culture is always top down, and the examples and the leadership set by the topmost level. So if you look at Wells Fargo, they were positioned as one of the best banks in the world. And everybody right up to the top boss, who had to finally resign, knew that bad things were happening just to meet the KPIs. That's one aspect. The second point about KPIs is that if you don't balance your metrics, that means you don't have metrics that balance each other out. So you measure value, you measure budget, money, you measure customer satisfaction, you measure employee satisfaction, and you measure your process optimum, your speed of your process, your throughput, etc. This comes from the days of the balanced scorecard. If you don't balance them, whatever you measure will improve at the cost of something else. So Wells Fargo were measuring the number of accounts that each individual person in a bank branch signed on every day. They had a target and they only measured that. They did not measure customer satisfaction. They did not measure employee satisfaction. And they did not measure any other sort of control points to balance this. So bad things started happening, and the leadership never had the human values that were needed to maintain and manage in this gray space. Because that's what ethics is. If you look at the word ethics, business ethics is not about following the rules. The rules are black or white. It's the gray space where business ethics come into play. And that is only reflected through human values. And the values of the leaders, because they are the ones who make the difference. Everyone else will follow them.
So related to this, I have a series of questions, which actually I'm just trying to think like which one should I ask first. But anyway, so I'm just going to go with the back in 2017 when you actually presented at the Business Agility Conference about structuring your business for agility, right?
Yeah.
Since you just touched base upon the KPIs, you talk about the KPI madness, the maze and the maze runners, right? The bureaucracy and the process. It's a very interesting analogy, and I would like to think about I would like to know in more in depth, if it is possible, to see how it actually helps businesses get to a point of agility in their business, which they're looking at.
Okay, so I'll give you a simple example. So there was a company, no names mentioned this time, who had a branch in Holland. Yeah, this was an international company. They had a branch in Holland. So they had a geographical structure as well to make sure that they were profitable in the different regions. So there was a general manager of the region, there was a general manager of the product line, there was a general manager of the service line, and there was a global general manager. Now, Holland was not doing well. So the margins, the gross margins, were not good. So guess what they did? They appointed a VP of gross margin in Holland. Another manager at very senior executive level who came in. Now, the underlying problem there was that they had so much of confusion, they did not know who to hold accountable and how to hold that person accountable. Basically, there was no single accountability between who was responsible for gross margin. Was it the general manager in Holland? Was it the product manager in Holland? Was it the global product manager? And everybody was blaming each other. So rather than solve that issue of clarity of role and responsibility, we just put one more person in there, thinking it would solve it. It made the maze even worse, because that person brought in an executive VP, comes in not by him or herself. They will come in with an entourage of directors, and each director has to have 4 managers, and each manager has to have a whole set of people under them. So before you knew it, there was a whole department managing gross margin. So that's just an example of keeping the clarity of the role very clear in order to get the simplicity of responsibility and accountability.
This brings me to that's a brilliant example. Seen that happening many times. But keeping that the same line of chain of thought, we're talking about the complex structures, right? And we all know that when you put complex structures, they result in complex processes and inefficient controls, right? And in some places, you've actually mentioned about the idea of multitasking and how it all affects us from a point of negativity that actually has, without having any positive impact, right? Any thought process behind this thinking?
I don't know. There are 2 sort of questions hidden in that,
yeah.
So I have to be careful, because multitasking is a separate subject by itself.
Yeah.
I'd rather not touch that subject together with this one, or else I'm going to burn my hands and I'm going to get shot at. So let's leave multitasking for a moment. And if you talk about the complex structures that people need to address, when you get down to it, it's not hard. So I worked with a group of 20,000 people in a certain department in a company, and they wanted to restructure, and become lean and agile. So we did that entire 20,000 group remodeling in 2 weeks. We did 3 iterations in those 2-week times with the leaders in the room. They did it themselves. I was just facilitating the process. And they came out with a model that really worked. It then took another month to implement it. And so it's not very hard. And they knew the answer themselves. Once they understood the principles, they knew the answer. So just to give you an example of another case, we had one very senior, and I'm talking about executive leader, who was nearing retirement, but not yet retired. So they had another 2 years in there. So, you know, we can't let him go. Let's hold on a little bit. So why don't we create a parking lot for him? So they created a new vice president position, which is on the side to give them something to do for the next 2 years, thinking that, oh, well, you know, we'll just move him out of the way and he'll be okay. Of course he won't be okay. He's created his own little empire there. He's hired his people, brought his friends in. He wants to add value. So the people in this maze are not bad people, not a single one of them. They're all good people trying to do the best. But by creating these super complex org structures, there's this great book I saw, I think 3 days ago. I don't know who's written it or something. It was on LinkedIn. And Mick, you may know. It was something about bullshit jobs.
I don't know the one, but I can relate to some of those jobs.
they're what we call, yeah. So that's their goal, and I think that's what we have to avoid. So once you get that in place, then the challenge is all about the operating model around it. And our biggest problem is this, and this has been a pet peeve of mine. Most senior business leaders are sent out there with targets and KPIs, with their hands tied and their legs tied, and the finance department controlling them from the back through budgets or whatever funding models, approval models, etc. They do not trust them, so they have a secondary aspect called the budgeting or the funding or the annual budgeting process that is used to tie them down. So on one hand, they give them a sales target. On the other hand, they cut the budget. And just to get a decision on a capital spend in one of the big companies I worked in used to take 3 months. 3 months to go through the maze and get capital approval for something you know is needed to hit your target. So that part of the operating model has to be optimized. And the work that Bashir is doing in Beyond Budgeting is fantastic work. And I hope more and more companies start adopting the Beyond Budgeting concepts of not using budgets and financial controls as a stick to have a secondary control on somebody just in case they don't hit their targets. I'll manage their budgets. It's just ridiculous. So that process is normally the last process that companies tend to attend to. In most of the organizations, I must humbly admit, I have failed miserably in changing that process. The CFOs just do not want a bar of it because they feel they will lose control. And in fact, they've already lost control. So once that realization sets in, and I think true change will happen in that area. And the Beyond Budgeting work is a fantastic step in, let's say, transformation process for agility.
You would have enjoyed, we had Bjarte on a couple of weeks ago, in fact, on the show, where we spoke about some of the same issues. And, you know, organizations, I mean, most organizations, they struggle for cash flow. If we look at, you know, kind of organizations like retail, they live on very small margins. Manufacturing lives on micro margins in a lot of cases. It's volume rather than profit margin they're actually making. How is it possible then to change those organizations, to convince them that there is a different way to do budgeting when they work on such kind of small margins?
Well, I hope one day the leaders will actually realize that those small margin businesses are the ones that need this sort of thing the most, because the decisions have to be made so fast, and the best people to make the decisions are the people closest to where the work is happening. I'll give you an example of AMI, it's called in Australia, an insurance branch of the Suncorp group. They had a call center once, and they were offering they had a refund scheme where they could approve only a certain amount of money, and they had to get approval. If it was more than $100, it had to go all the way up and then come all the way down. And one of the things that was proposed at that time was, why don't we increase the level of approval authority for the actual call center people? Let's lift the limit to unlimited and see what happens to your total, let's say, your expenses that go out through that way, that channel. CFO absolutely freaked out, but he was open enough to realize that it's worth a try. So we tried it in a very small contained environment, a small group over a short period of time. What do you think happened to the numbers? Do you think these people gave out more money in terms of claims that came in, or do you think they gave out less money?
I'm going to say they gave out less.
Yes, absolutely. They gave out less because they treated it like their own money. They gave out less than the senior managers would have approved. And this was a shocking turnaround. So if you really trust, with clarity of purpose, the people at the bottom, and you can have secondary controls in place. Nobody is talking about not having secondary controls in place. That would be very naive of me to say that. Have it, but don't have primary controls in place that slow your process down.
So we're looking at reversing that trust kind of equation, to be trusting people down below rather than convincing people below to trust management up.
Yeah, but also giving them that clarity, because you can't just tell somebody, I trust you, and give them no friggin' clue about what you're trusting them about and why and how. If you just say, oh, well, here's your target, I trust you, bye, that won't work either. So it has to be a concerted, collaborative effort where people are open, transparent, and honest with each other and having those hard conversations. There will always be mistakes. And if you don't have an environment where mistakes can be learned from, as opposed to, let's take the stick and beat the hell out of them, then nobody will expose any mistakes, and you'll get this, it's all okay. How's it going? Oh, it's going fine. Have you had any no problems at all? And then you better worry when somebody tells you that.
All right. So I'm just going to digress again from this topic to happiness. And the happiness of, you actually mentioned about two interesting things. One is the employee happiness and driving the customer happiness. And then you also talk about BMI, which has nothing to do with the with the body weight mass index, but we're talking about the bureaucracy mass index. So it's a very interesting analogy, and I would love to know, your thinking and how others actually have taken that. Any examples you can share with us?
I'll touch on the happiness part of it first. Because if you look at employee satisfaction and taking that into account, it's a very good measure. And very often I have worked with some HR departments that come out with this 20-point questionnaire on how the employees are feeling. And you really need one question. Are you happy in the work environment? Are you happy? Maybe a bit too broad, because there could be other personal things that affect happiness as a statement. But are you happy in the work environment is a pretty good indicator. Now, what you're looking for is not the number that comes out of that sort of a metric at all. It's about the trend of the number that you're monitoring. Is it getting better or is it going worse? So take the Suncorp group, for example. During the Agile transformation years, which was 2007 till around 2014, we could actually see that employee satisfaction trending up. And guess what? It actually went parallel to the stock price. So The shareholders were happy. We knew the customers were happy because they were buying more, and the employees were happy. All three rising at the same time. And of course, after that, there was a big management change, and management with a completely different cultural style, command and control. I would say very much in some areas almost abusive, from what I've heard firsthand and what I've seen and read about. That has destroyed that employee satisfaction, and you can also see it in the share price. So there's a very good example of how one correlates with the other. I really like Richard Branson's statement there. He says, if you really care for customers, and let's focus on the customers, let's think about customer satisfaction, the customer experience, you have to think about the employee experience, because it's employees that touch customers.
Yep, that's true.
Let me tackle that BMI one very quickly.
Yes.
I don't know how we're doing
Yes.
for time. We've got about 10 minutes left. So the bureaucracy mass index, or the BMI measure that I came up with, I think it was in 2016, is a very simple measure of enablers versus doers. So you measure it as a ratio. You take the total group of people, you put their roles down, and you say these roles are doers and these roles are enablers. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not saying enablers are not needed. Absolutely, enablers are needed. But I myself, an Agile coach, I'm an enabler. The manager of the department, enabler. What about the project manager? An enabler. The doers are the people actually doing the work. And if you measure the ratio of these two, and there's a little formula for that that's very simple to get, you should be in the range of somewhere between 8% to 12% for a healthy organization. 8% to 12% should be enablers, and the rest should be doers. Well, in the banks that I've worked with, and a lot of them, when we start the transformation, you're looking at 30 to 35%. And that is way beyond obese. And this sort of a measurement, it used to take us something like half a day, once we get the data, of course, because gathering the data on the roles is another story by itself in big companies. But once you have the data of who's in which role, it takes you half a day to put this BMI together, and then you watch the trend of it.
So in all of this, we're looking at culture, happiness, trust in organizations as enablers for moving forward with transformations, to actually generate that kind of environment where we can push forward, transform, and become better places to work, better companies to serve our customers, and keep our customers hopefully happy.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the pressure we're under now is going to make it more important for us to do this and do this well and care for people, because people are going to have tremendous amount of opportunities. As I said, the world is the stage now. Since you don't have to be close to the place where you work, you can get a job in more. The job opportunities are more. You can work almost remotely in any job, and companies are going to have to care for their people more, or they're going to lose the good ones.
I think we're seeing that we're in 4 different countries at the moment, the 3 of us here, and our colleague behind helping us out with the camera work. So we're already in 4 different countries.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Phil, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manoj. Thank you very much, and Mike as well, behind the scenes organizing this. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for being on.
And I'm here if you ever need me. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can contact me, and look forward to chatting soon.
Great. We hope to have you back sometime soon as well.
Stay safe.
Yes.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you,
coming up next, we have Mercy George Igbafe talking about Agile women in Nigeria. We also hope to have our first German-speaking interviews going on in the next couple of weeks. That won't be with me. Don't speak German yet. Probably with Mike, though. And we hope to have some announcements for next week's shows as well coming up soon. You can check that out on the businessagility.live site, or find us on the YouTube channel where you can subscribe to this. Thanks, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.